Ready or not, here we come, getting down on the one which we bleed.
Like, while I was at Just Debut, I realized that, well, I've known that me and Rashad are kind of like the guys that have done a lot of research as far as like different approaches to the Boogaloo dance and to pop in, and like we try to honor everyone's traditions
Yeah.
equally and share those stories, and I realize that that's what people look to me for when I'm out there. A lot of the
Or
a
a
lot of the
source.
poppers, yeah, they're
Some
like, what,
information.
these guys know about many different stories, and
Mm.
so like I'm kind of like just assuming that role. So this this interview series, I want to call it like Boogaloo Traditions, just because it's about honoring the many traditions that were spawned out of the Boogaloo movement, like as far as like the Boogaloo dance in Oakland and what spread from there, and different cities calling it different things. And like I'm starting this interview series to kind of get a perspective from people that were there in the different cities and
Mm.
talk about like what the dance looked like to them, what it was, what they called it, what words they used, and also to just document people's stories, because there's a lot of people that um, maybe like I consider them unsung heroes,
Mm.
like people that aren't maybe quite as famous, but their stories just as important as anyone else. And so the idea of the interview series is to document people's stories and see like, what did they call it, what was it like, and all
Okay.
of that.
Mm.
So I guess maybe we could just start, like, for people that don't know, if you could just like introduce yourself and say like where where you were from when you started boogalooing or
Okay.
popping, and when that was.
All right. Let me see. Hello. My name is Damon Frost, and I was born in Los Angeles and moved away from Los Angeles with my mom at the age of 4, and pretty much traveled uh, up and down California, Hawaii, and hopped over to Europe a little bit. So I was born 1965. So um, let me see. My first introduction to this dance style, I guess, would be the robot
Mm,
and all the gazillions of variations of the robot that I had seen everywhere, from TV, from house parties, of friends, all through my life. Um, I, the Frost family, my dad's side of the family, he has siblings in San Diego, and he has friends in Southern California, and his mom lived in Northern California in Berkeley. So I would be uh, kind of doing the circuit between
yeah.
all places. My grandmother on my mother's side lived in Alhambra, and that's Southern California, next to Pasadena. So I kind of got like a a picture of California from down south and above.
Ah, okay.
So f- the things that I saw was just like a whole bunch of different robot styles,
Okay.
and uh, given the age that I was, let me see, until about 1975, um, right when I'm like 9 and 10 years old, the people are doing so many different robot styles that I'm calling it the robot just because I don't know any better. And
Okay.
some people are calling it other names. And some people are, you doing that can you know how to do this dance, like kind of, and and I never really heard like a very specific exact name for it until uh I moved to the Bay Area.
Okay.
I uh my dad lived in Berkeley because he was taking care of his mom, and I was traveling all over the place with my mom and lived in Hawaii, and I was going back and forth between Hawaii and Berkeley.
Yeah.
And as a fourth grader at Columbus Elementary School, I saw people dancing, like doing sort of like synchronized steps uh, and people trying to like really like make their stops really clean. I can't remember the first time I heard the word dime stopping, but it was like really, really early on. Sometimes people would say just diming. Sometimes people would say busting. Oh, you bust? You bust? Sometimes people would say, let me see, I remember, especially around the Rick James busting out of L7, that like a lot of people were saying busting then. So that's kind of like that was like a popular phrase that wasn't just for dancing. It just meant like anybody, you know, kind of had a similar meaning to like the word break, like breaking out, like just breaking into something crazy, like busting into some very, very similar, but like on the California funk side. At the time, when Shields and Yarnell finally started getting well known and stuff, and they were on TV shows, then people were calling it shielding, stuff like that, and incorporate some of the stuff from their what's the word, from their vocabulary, and some of the stuff that they did, like they would do some silly stuff, but it was all based on the robot. But I've heard it change names over the years. I've heard people say strut in San Francisco, like when we would go across the bay to dance, they'd be like, you strut. When I go to Sacramento, so some of the members of my crew in the early 80s, they were called the Master City Breakers from the Bay Area, and they used to live in Sacramento, so they had family in Sac, and they'd go to Sac, and they'd show me all the Sac styles. So one of my big influences is a guy named Chris, and we used to call him Toy Master from Master City Breakers, and Derek Tobias. His name was Diamond D, so it's not the East Coast rapping Diamond D, but Diamond D from the Bay. And they showed me all kind of like sax styles. And so when we'd go to Sacramento, I'd see footwork that I'd never seen before anywhere. And they told me about a style where they like really hang, like let's say if the beat goes 1, 2, 3, 4, they pose, and then they spin around, and they pose in these really bizarre balances, like on one foot, like in a sailor, thing. And they start, and they sometimes they'd have canes and stuff. And one of the areas, I can't remember if it was Old Park or Oak Park of Sacramento, but that's a very old style of popping. And they didn't call it popping, but it was popping. And a lot of the pimpy sort of hat like thing, they were doing that like on another level. It was like really, really cool. So when I went there, it's like there was, for me being a kid, well, excuse me, let me see, by the time I got over there, let's say it's 1982. So when I go to SAC and I see these styles, it's like they're really super evolved. So they've been doing this for a long time. The cats that are doing it are in their mid-30s. So at that time, I'm like, they're old men. Says the 50-year-old to you now. But it I saw that like that was really, really developed. And uh yeah, and it just seems like different areas, they just called it different things and they stuck to that name. And sometimes they had similar influences. Like, everybody knows the Bugs Bunny, Ekum Akum, kind of stuff. Everybody knows the Seventh Voyage of Sinbad.
Right.
Everybody knows these things. But then sometimes there were things that were really specific to a certain area. Like, for instance, like anybody go to San Jose, they know the Playboys, and they know the Playboys were so advanced with their tuts and their routines that it was just at the time it was unprecedented. So like, and they really held on to that. That was their pride and tradition, and they made it known. You know what I mean? In San Francisco, people would. Some of them would film more. Some of them would do, and they with pride would do that. The people from Richmond, they would dance in a certain way, and they would hold on to that. They weren't really mixing like us on the other side of the bay. We weren't trying to film more.
Right.
It was the only person that was the connection between that and Berkeley and the other side of the bay for the most part. With Demons of the Mind was Dana, because Dana was going back and forth because some of the demons lived in the city, lived in San Francisco, and he himself lived in Berkeley. So he was traveling to a lot of different spaces, the group, and they, but for the most part, the people had their dress codes and their dance codes, and it really wasn't mixing, and
was it
sorry.
was it easy to see like the clear connections between where the inspiration was coming from for some of those different cities, like San Francisco doing the Fillmore? Was it like, do you look back at it now and say like, oh, well, that's kind of like swinging the arms and like how they swing their arms in Oakland, or that's like, is it
Some
easy to see some of the connections, or like, oh, this guy moved here? Like, I've heard stories about like Ben James moving from Oakland to San Francisco and that he had a more stretched out style. Like, are there some like key people that you can remember that like influenced different cities' perspectives?
Okay. Well, first of all, I have to like really make clear of by the time I'm really focused and I'm thinking, okay, I can do this, and uh, when I started getting some attention in this, it was the early '80s.
Okay.
So before that, I had seen things, but as a young kid, when I'm like, 6, 7, 8, I'm not asking those questions.
Yeah.
It's a big world to me, and and things are just shocking the hell out of me. I'm
Yeah.
going to house parties and people are doing this thing, and I'm just so mesmerized that I wasn't sure if it was just that one person or if it was a scene. I think I'm not going out to clubs. There's what you see, the exposure on TV is super limited.
Mm.
You know, so I was just like grasping for like signs and clues. So I wasn't really asking those questions. At that age,
Right.
the first time I'm seeing these things,
Right.
and ever since I can remember, really, I mean, like I remember dancing, trying to do the James Brown for my cousins when I'm 4 years old in San Diego. Okay. So that's 1969. Okay. Then there were robots. People were dancing as long as I can remember, people have been doing the robot. Okay. So fast forward to me seeing connections from things and there being like specific people that
Mm.
are really pivotal in the Bay in the early '80s. Yes, there are. Uh, but um, the the way information was allowed to pass is much different. So, for instance, if somebody would do a hot move,
Hmm.
you couldn't really just go, "Ooh, I'm going to do it," because, I mean, there was violence to pay for it.
Really?
So,
So
yeah,
so that
like
was like a thing. Like if you looked like anyone else, it was you would get hit.
no, no, it was like if you come over here dancing like somebody we know and you're not repping this place, you will get checked.
Mm,
Because the thing is, just like hot dancers are kind of like these are like young stars. You
okay.
know what I mean? You could be playing sports. You know what I mean? You could be on like the varsity, junior varsity. You could be, like doing baseball, football, or basketball. That could be your key, or you could just be a badass dancer. That was like one of the options. So having some star, you know, get attention socially from the girls and such, and
Mm,
just come over and just look, like people weren't just gonna allow somebody to just get that attention. Like, no, you have to have some kind of past. You have to know somebody. you know, it just wasn't like that. People are not, it's like battling was very different. I mean,
mm,
it was a it's like disgrace. I mean, you lose a battle,
mm.
people talk about it. And this is your ticket. This is your social ticket to acceptance. Like, you're not trying to lose a battle. It's not an exchange.
Yeah, yeah,
Like,
exactly.
it's very clear. You're not trying to lose. Like, legend is built on people talking and, these things happening, these battles occurring. So in order to use somebody's step, you had to know that person, you had to talk, or you had to trade moves. And
Mm,
that's so luckily I was around incredible dancers. I was around uh though younger than me, incredible, Melvin, Mr. Fantastic. The thing is, because you had to either exchange moves or be somehow associated to the people that were claiming these skills that were winning battles.
mm,
It kind of made it, it's difficult to explain. I won't say that like automatically you wanted to just take something. It was so unspoken and so shamed that
mm.
you wouldn't think of doing it.
Ah,
It was like, um you wouldn't do it.
yeah.
It everybody was so busy trying to be unique and develop their own things and get their own applause. This is your own cheese,
Yeah.
that people really went to great lengths and took pride in it.
Ah,
So when I would trade moves with people like Melvin, Mr. Fantastic, maybe Boogaloo Vic, maybe Kalani, uh, maybe Lonnie Pop Tart,
yep.
maybe Dana, maybe a guy named Tony. They call him Boneless.
Right.
Uh, Verndell, UFO Encounters, from any one of these. There was a guy named Baby Rob, and this is like one of the first guys I saw really specialize in ground moves.
Mm,
A Filipino guy, and he had a older partner, a bigger guy named Ed DeCumas. So like when I'm seeing the people from my area do this, it's like it, it didn't, when we would trade moves. Oh, show me this, and you do this and this, and I would practice.
yeah.
I try my best. People weren't fond of the fact that I was friends to these people and doing these things that I was trying to be like a better practitioner. It's like it wasn't very popular. It was like where'd you go? It's like I know him. It's like okay, you know what I mean? And they would give me a pass, and I would see them, and I would do it in front of them, in front of people, and it was okay. And it was like people had to be like, okay,
Yeah.
like you know.
Do you think it was more respected to like have, even if you hadn't traded moves, like if you just had some style that was just never before seen, do you think did people appreciate that thing? Like wow, I've never seen that. That's dope.
Yep, and that's a very important uh, fact. And this thing didn't only have to do with what you would see; it also had to do with what you would hear. People wanted to hear new music that they hadn't heard before. Oh my God, that's the beat! And people were open for new things. The way people were dressing different.
Mm.
That's fresh. And there, all this stuff was I don't know how to explain. It was alternative. So the fact that you were doing some other dance that wasn't taught in the dance school, they didn't teach this stuff in schools at the time. It was every man for themselves. So if you get into a battle, you could be popping against a breaker.
Yeah.
It was like you just had to win.
Right.
That was it. You had your people that believed in you, and they had their people that believed in them, and I will show you. It was like that. It wasn't like, okay, it's not this strain of orange going against that strain of orange.
Right.
It was not like that. It was like oranges and apples going against meats. It was really so everybody in their respective style. Like if it was a club, there was girls there. You just had to succeed. You know what I mean? What are you gonna do? You got and and yeah, like b-boys will go against b-boys. Yeah, and poppers will go against poppers, but everybody would just go against everybody. I remember there was a guy from the Bay Area. His name was Baby Blast. So one of the earliest forms of battles were talent shows.
Right.
So the people that would enter these talent shows, I mean, they had talent shows on TV. So ever since the 70s, we're watching the Gong Show. We're seeing like, okay, you got to dress up. You got to be serious about it. You got to have some skills, and you got to make a presentation. You got to connect. There's one guy named Baby Blast. I believe he's a Filipino guy. He was quite small in stature, and this guy would incorporate Michael Jackson things. He would incorporate popping. Girls would lose their minds for this guy.
Yeah.
And so he was competing head to head against Gentlemen of Production and Demons of the Mind in talent shows. And he might win.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Somebody that's doing Michael Jackson-ish stuff, going against a troupe of boogalooing and roboting and strutting innovators. It was up to anybody, just whoever got the screams, whoever it was. There was no rules for this.
Yeah.
You just had to win the crowd.
Right.
However you did it, whether it was you breaking out doing something that nobody had ever seen before. Oh my God! Just that snap. Like Dana Durham, from Demons and Media Circus, Boogaloo Dana, we call him.
Yeah.
He did this thing one time, and I know you know what I'm going to tell you. But he convinced a crowd of people that he took a pill. I think it was out of his watch, put it in his mouth, and shrank. He convinced, and he held his face. I don't know how. Listen, he looked like he shrank. It was an effect in the chat. The legend of this is perpetuated today. It's Dana, shrinking Dana. That Dana, yes. He blew people's minds, and when it's time, when it's time to see it, you might get lucky. He might show you, he might not. You never know. But they saw something, and that something worked, and that's how it worked back then.
Gotcha. And what about like for your personal style? What were some of the things that you were inspired by, or what would you say that you were bringing to the game, like as far as like bringing something different, or like how did you win battles? Like what was it that element that you were like, okay, I'm gonna do this. This is really gonna get people. This is gonna get them.
Okay, okay, I'm a kid trying to lock, not working for me. Just too. I'm not that coordinated. It's just not working. It's just I can't. I'm like I try to do a little hop and no. It's just like there's something they're doing. I'm not getting it. I don't understand.
Yeah.
I'm trying to do the robot, and it's like I'm 10 years old. I'm trying to do the robot as good as a 10-year-old. Trying to do the robot. It's like there was nobody teaching me. It wasn't pretty. You know what I mean? I wouldn't tell anybody that I had a fierce robot. No.
Yeah.
So, but this is what happened. So I'm watching these things, right? And I remember being in LA, and I remember being in the Bay and trying to put things together. And it's like I'm dabbling. And when I would do anything around more people that were up to, that were more advanced than me in the 80s, like they're saying I'm dancing in an old way. It's an old style. Damon is this, he got that old thing. He's doing that. We're doing this now, And so at this time in the 80s, people know me as BMX Damon. I'm BMX Damon.
Okay.
I'm not dancing Damon. I'm not Boogaloo. I'm not popping Damon. I am BMX Damon. Damon. Really serious about bicycle motocross.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's a story unto itself. But I could say that whatever level I've reached in dance, I had reached that level first in bicycle motocross. Yeah. And my first like mini fame was BMX. I am that guy. I got sponsors, by the legendary Boss label out of Oakland. I am that. I'm focused.
Yeah.
And I have an accident and I break my wrist, and it takes me out for over a year. So while I'm going stir crazy, it's like my legs are strong as hell from my bike riding. And I'm trying to find something that I can do, and I still can't use my right arm so tough. So, and I'm seeing people from Berkeley High School, and I'm seeing Baby Rob, I'm seeing Melvin, I'm seeing these people, and I'm trying to, we're cool. I'm good people. They're good people, and they're showing me some stuff, and I'm trying to get into this newfangled way of moving. The way exactly at the time I received the dance styles from the Bay, from the early 80s, right then, was like on another level. I had already been doing talent shows, doing simple stuff for my high school. But after this bicycle accident, I went in with another kind of focus. And at that time, the most incredible thing I'd seen were the ground moves and the waves that people were doing in Berkeley. So the people that were on the top of the food chain was Melvin, Mr. Fantastic, with these ground moves, Baby Rob, who was just a force to he was the king of these ground moves. He was super flexible, super skinny Filipino guy, very small stature, really cool, kind of lazy, kind of had a little drop and would drop into these crazy positions that was just wiping people out. He was just he was dressing like a rocker. He was a heavy metal dude. So he had his black leather jackets and he had his black pants and bandanas and stuff with spikes and stuff. He's not on some funk stuff. He's on some other thing. So this is like another. It's like not only did he dance different, he looked different. He was on some other ish. You know, he was just different. And he'd come and he would just wreck the set. And there was a legendary battle against him and Melvin, Mr. Fantastic. And this is very late in the Bay Area's dance scene. So by the time I get super serious, this is very late on the chain. BMX Damon is hanging out with the dancers. Yeah. That's what people you know. The great names and the big groups of people perform. It's like I'm not on that level, and it was on the decline. Like a lot of the people that were the really big names, you know, from the Resurgence, these people weren't coming out to my high school, Berkeley High School. If you got lucky, you might see them in a talent show. There was no internet. So if you found out about a show, it was by word of mouth. So it wasn't easy to have all this access to this information. So, but when I saw these ground moves and stuff, I was like, I that's what I have to do. Yeah. It looked so incredible to me. I was so struck. It was just fantastic. And it wasn't easy because I was not flexible.
Really?
I had to work. My mom was into yoga, and I must have took up every damn stretch that I saw my mom do. I was determined I'm gonna do this thing. So being the obsessive kind of person that I am, I was stretching for hours all the time. Like I get home, I couldn't just sit in a W. I'm not one of these people that just sit in a W and watch TV. That's not my flexibility. So I had to work it out, you know, and it you know, anybody that isn't flexible, you know, I was so far from being relaxed and touching my toes. It just wasn't happening for me like that. So I really had to put myself through it and teach myself how to safely get into these positions and make it work for me. And I worked it out. So that was the thing. I was like the flexible. I was tall for the time. I was like 6'4", so like I'm flexible and I'm tall, and it's just making a big impression. Now, mind you, I'm goofy as hell. Just goofy for goofy's sake. But the fact that my dad was listening to the OJs and a lot of Philadelphia sounds and stuff, like, you know, the Spinners, Four Tops and stuff. So when the Rubber Band Man song came out, my dad used to call me the Rubber Band, Rubber Band Man. So the fact that I'm using this name and I'm goofy just made, that kind of helped the rubber band concept, and it was easy for people to remember. So at the tail end, by the time I get on, it's like I just have a series of tricks.
Okay.
I do this, I do that. Some of the things I've seen before, like, Twister Flex is, you know, everybody did the Twister Flex by this time because it was made famous by the guy that made it famous, who called himself that. So I'm like, okay, how am I gonna flip this Twister Flex my way?
Yeah.
And I figured out a way to make it a little bit more continuous, and I stretched to try to make it be bigger and such like this. So that was a takeout move. So anybody do a Twister Flex, I'm like,
Gotcha.
why that's this, and then, and so I had a series of moves, but I wasn't a really good popper. That's like one of the latest things that I had to practice on to try to get, because everybody else got so good popping. I'm like, damn, I'm gonna have to learn this thing.
Yeah.
I could stop okay. I could pop a little bit, but yeah. So it was flexibility and waves were my focus, and the fact that I had a broken wrist meant that my touch was super limited. So I didn't go that route either.
Right.
So I was really like, when people were doing touch, when people were doing other things, it's like I really stuck to what I could do with my body and doing some flexible stuff and trying to just knock it out of the ballpark when I did it.
Right.
You know?
When
So
when you said like you weren't like going into popping, like you weren't doing a lot of popping, and was there also like other like were there a lot of terms for that motion, like the tensing of the muscles and like the stopping really hard? Like were people using different names for that, or did everybody just say that that's popping?
well, this is how it happened. Around 1977, 78, around, I'm like in about fifth grade in elementary school in Berkeley, and somebody says, "Oh, you Boogaloo?" And I'd never heard the term before. I'd heard a bunch of different people trying to describe what the name of the names and names and names and
Yeah.
names and names and names and names.
Yeah.
And then I heard the word Boogaloo. I'm like, what? Like, because I'm real hard headed. I'm like, what? Like, book, like, so that's what you call what I do now,
Hmm.
And it was like, yeah, that's what they call it now, It's like, oh, yeah, and I wasn't really feeling it until I saw the Electric Boogaloos, and I was
Yeah.
like, oh, okay, I want to be like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're doing that, and everybody called it Boogalooing. I can't remember when I first heard the term popping. I can't
Yeah.
remember. I don't remember if it was before or after I heard of the term Boogaloo. I can't remember,
Yeah.
but somewhere thereabouts.
Yeah.
And people were so relieved to just have a name that everybody understood what you were talking about. It was cool, even though every single one of these areas had a different name, a different style. They all called it Boogaloo.
So at
Or
that
they all
point,
popping because everybody understood. And
so
especially after the movies came out, because all we wanted to do was be remembered. So when Breaking the movie comes out, and they're talking about popping. It's like, you know, people are coming up to me like, can you do the turbo? I mean, people, the names, you just can't
So
imagine.
many
People were
names.
just trying to understand and, define what it is that we are doing. So people were pretty much happy to have a name that everybody just understood. And people would use a few names, but it wasn't actually so specific,
Right.
like as exactly to what
Right.
it was doing.
So you could see someone doing a robot, and at this point people are saying, okay, he's boogalooing. Or you
He could
could
have been
see
doing a robot. He could have been boogalooing. He could have been strutting. He could have been busting. He could have been sacking. He could have been. Listen, man, it's like the name. It was just there were some things that were very specific.
right.
Somebody was waving, self-explanatory.
Yeah.
Somebody tutting, self-explanatory. After the Tutankhamun exhibition in the late 70s, even Steve Martin was singing
Yeah.
Funky Tut. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Everybody understood the concept of somebody looking like hieroglyphics and doing the tut patterns with their hands. Now, when people were going to discotheques and in talent shows at that time, the strobe light effect was a very big party effect and gimmick that people would use. For instance, Demons of the Mind had strobe lights that would come on. There were songs called by B-52 called the strobe light. There was like it's a bit so everybody understood the concept of what it looked like to have this light flashing off and on.
Right.
So people started strobing. They were trying to make the effect of the and everybody had a clear picture since it was a common,
Something they could relate to.
just like the Twistiflex watch. There was a commercial of the Twistiflex watch band, and they pull it and they twist it, and he lets it go, and it goes, whoosh, and everybody just understand it's a twist, and people got. It was very clear, you know what I mean? When people were animating, the claymation, stuff that was popular, like there was people really looking like King Kong.
Yeah.
Like they really looked like that.
Yeah.
Like they really had that effect so down that they could do that. So everybody understood, these words when it was very specific like that. Animating, yes. Strobe. What's the difference between animating and strobe? Sometimes people called it the same things. Other people were very specific. You know what I mean?
So it really depends on the perspective of the person, like what city you were from, like what you saw
And to
growing
what
up.
level they had perfected their effect. So basically, whoever was at the top of the food chain within that parameter would kind of become the authority on it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's my take on it. The words weren't so damn specific
Right. Yeah.
at first until people wanted to claim their contribution to these things. I made up names, other people made up names, and I'd say I was doing this and I see other people doing things that I did and they would call it different things.
Yeah.
Like for instance, I'll give you an example. Verndell from UFO Encounters was kind enough to show me what he called the Pac-Man walk. Okay, so he did this Pac-Man walk. He showed it to me. It was cool. We traded. I can't remember what I showed him. And that was that. Fast forward years later, I see Wiggles do something that looks very similar.
Yeah.
And I'm like, and when I was lucky enough to meet him, and we're on tour together, and I asked him about, like, where did this, are you trying to do the Pac-Man walk? He goes, no. And he told me about his way into what he calls the Wiggle walk. They're different, but it looks very similar.
Yeah.
And things can look very similar, and they can develop simultaneously in different parts of the world or the
Yeah.
country at that time, So it was just no rhyme or reason to things. People would be influenced by something and it would turn, people would interpret it different ways sometimes. It wasn't really until people started getting VHS recorders in the 80s when we could finally rewind, figure this shit out.
Yeah.
Listen. Uh, uh, Everybody would think that they were doing something that they weren't doing. I mean, one of the things I learned from Verndell, he asked me if I could show that to him. I'm like, dude, this is your step. He goes, no, it's not, because we figured out wrong. And that was one of the things that helped,
Yeah.
Because there was a lot of variation.
Yeah.
And if you were lucky enough, your variation would fit your body and so on. And yeah, and you would raise it up. So what happened is when people started rewinding the tapes and getting very specific, then you could really like go in and like, slow motion. Oh my gosh. So rewinding stuff, the amount of moves that came from rewinding the tape.
Yeah.
I'm like, did you see what it looked like in reverse? It just, it was a whole new world of analyzation. And that's when things started to get more zoomed in,
So I gotta head to work, but
Okay.
thank you for sharing your perspective, Damon Frost, Rubber Band Man. Yeah, like I think it's always interesting to hear your perspective because, like you said, you lived in so many different places. Like we didn't even really get to touch on Europe, like and how that was when you went there. Maybe we can do that another day. But like it was cool to hear all the places that you went and what people were calling the dance and. Yeah, this thing, it's really, I feel like this dance is so hard to sum it up in just a few sentences, because there's so many stories, there's so many different perspectives, so many different names, so many different pieces to the puzzle. So like,
one thing that I'd really like to talk about the next time we speak and build like this is when you were talking about tying the lines between this thing. There's some incredible similarities that are just so uncanny that like almost in the same way like young kids all around the world do the patty cake.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like where does it come from? I don't know. The way little kids tease each other, like they do this in all languages. Where do they get it from? I do not know. It's just uncanny. And when you go back to people like Earl Snakehips, you know what I mean? The fact that he's looking like he is boogalooing for real, and guy predates us by so many decades. It's there's a lot of connections. But I truly believe that people didn't see Earl and take this thing and there's amazing coincidences that may not be coincidences that it may be our ancestors working through us, but there's uncanny connections through the years, and we can get into that another time.
And I also want to get into the music too, like a little bit of like some of the anthems of the time and how they affected the dance. Like because I know that is another thing that everyone was listening to those songs in different places, but like the music inspired the movement. So maybe next time we can talk a little bit about that too.
Yep.
But thank you, man. I appreciate it.
Anytime, man. Anytime. It's not doing me any good, this knowledge.
All that info.
Let's give it away. All right, bro.
All right. Have a good one, guys. See you, Locksmith.
Peace.
Peace.
Peace. Yeah.